After reports came out last week linking OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam to the Indiana Pacers, this news continues to escalate as the Indiana Pacers are desperately trying to acquire a big athletic wing to really solidify that core around Tyrese Halliburton that almost won the Indiana Pacers the in-season tournament. So we'll break down the latest developments on that front, including Darko Rajakovic defending one of the decisions he made last week, as well as Yuta Watanabe speaking out on leaving Toronto. So lots of stuff to break down. Without further ado, let's jump to the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is the Pacers reports escalating, specifically via trade. Now, as we sort of broke down last week, the Indiana Pacers have been linked directly to OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. And this desperation, so to speak, this intrigue in acquiring a wing to sort of maximize that Tyrese Halliburton sort of timeline that we're starting to embark on, it's really amped up over the past week or so, given the fact the Indiana Pacers almost won the in-season tournament. And obviously, the Lakers ended up getting the W, but the Pacers, they can put up points in a hurry, but obviously defensively is the big question mark about Indiana and stuff. And they have a good shot blocker, Miles Turner, even if sometimes he's not the positionally most sound guy out there on the floor. Halliburton is a very strong sort of guard, and they brought in Bruce Brown this offseason in order to solidify that sort of defense on the wing. And surprisingly, Obi Toppin has stepped up for that team in a big way after acquiring him from the Knicks, but they really need a strong wing defender to sort of lock down these guys. The top sort of position in terms of players that end up winning you championships, and LeBron James is the Kevin Durant's, the Kawhi Leonards of the world. In the Eastern Conference this season, you have the Tatums, you have all these guys that the Pacers are going to need to be able to lock down if they want a chance to sort of compete in the East. And this is what leads us into this next report that has sort of escalated the Pacers' desire to make one of these big trades, as the Indiana Pacers are reportedly looking to add a big athletic two-way wing on the trade market, according to Adrian Wojnarowski. So, more and more reports are circulating that the Pacers want one of these deals to get done, and obviously the two big names that were brought up were Pascal Siakam and OG last week. So the desperation is increasing, and they've also expressed a willingness to trade for one of these guys, specifically OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, as given the emergence of Tyrese Halliburton as potentially a superstar in the NBA, they are confident, as we heard in last week's report, that they'll be able to retain any free agents that are potentially unrestricted coming off this offseason. Now, that confidence plays a big factor in terms of all this sort of stuff in the favor of the Toronto Raptors, because if the Pacers feel like they can retain these star guys on the Toronto Raptors that are unrestricted free agents this summer, that means there's a little bit more bargaining power from Masai Ujiri to sort of acquire back players and say, hey, you believe you guys are going to keep them? We want a haul for him then at this point, because the major topic, the major reason of discussion that the packages were kind of lackluster this summer, especially for Pascal Siakam, was because he's a rental. He was unrestricted free agent at the end of the offseason. So when teams like the Miami Heat and Indiana Pacers believe that they can keep both of these guys, it only increases their trade value in a potential bidding war. So that's pretty good. But again, what could we get back from the Indiana Pacers? Because I'm reading the comment section and I agree with you guys. A lot of the sort of packages that are getting thrown out there do feel still, even though they're a bit better than the Atlanta Hawks deals we heard rumored over the summer, they still feel a little bit lackluster. And basically, I've been the proponent, if we make a trade with the Indiana Pacers, whether it's Pascal or OG, I want Benedict Mathurin coming back to Toronto. Not just because he's Canadian, but because he's a lottery pick a couple seasons ago. His stats are down a little bit this season. 13 points per game. Not too crazy stats in the rest of the box score. Plays solid defense and stuff along those lines. He is a bucket getter. And being unleashed a little bit more in the offense, I think with Toronto, he could really complement a guy like Scotty Barnes nicely. He can shoot the three, he can space everything out, he can create for himself, and it's just a guy that sort of fits what the Toronto Raptors can back to. He's really competitive. He comes out last season, especially for the Pacers, even off the bench, will be a spark plug and getting buckets and turnaround games for the Indiana Pacers. He's a guy that I would love to see come back in a potential trade with the Indiana Pacers. Now, will the Pacers potentially deal him up? I'm not 100% sure. It's dependent. My value in my head of Pascal and OG are so deflated from the offers we were receiving this summer. I'm skeptical that we would be able to get a guy like Benedict Mathurin, but looking at the rest of the roster, there are some decent players. Again, Obi Toppin has stepped up. Not a guy I'd be necessarily super interested in. I don't imagine they trade Bruce Brown. But in terms of prospects and stuff, Andrew Nembhard would be a nice acquisition. And Jarace Walker, even though his stats are definitely down, he was a lottery pick for the Pacers. Again, not guys that you want to center a deal around. Multiple first-round picks would have to be involved in those in order for us to get proper excited with just those two prospects. Obviously, a Buddy Hield salary filler would also have to be included, but definitely some interesting pieces on the Pacers that don't make a deal completely unfounded, unrealistic, or anything along those lines. So let me know what you guys think about potentially making a trade with the Indiana Pacers, but let's dive into the next topic discussion. The next thing we're taking a look at is Darko Rajakovic speaking out on a decision he made last week. Now, the Toronto Raptors had an ugly loss to the Charlotte Hornets. Again, a team without LaMelo Ball. Sure, I think they're an underrated team. Terry Rozier, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, forever what do you think if he should be back on the court? He's been back playing well. Mark Williams, they have a good roster. They're with the Charlotte Hornets. It's not to bash them completely, but the Raptors have to be smashing that team. We have to be crushing that team if we want to sort of prove ourselves in the Eastern Conference. Prove that these trade rumors that have percolated over the past couple weeks are just unnecessary, and Masai Ujiri can continue to sort of build around this current core group that we have. But losses like that are devastating, and Darko Rajakovic made an interesting decision at the end of that game. The bench really brought the team back. In the end of that fourth, now Scotty was also amazing in that game, so it makes sense having him in that game there. But basically, Darko was brought up and said, "We trust those guys to finish the game. They got to get their job done. So we got to do their job." Rajakovic said after the game, Rajakovic's reasoning extended to Achua, Boucher, and Malachi Flynn's extensive workload that game, which they're not used to. He also emphasized that getting freshly rested players back on the court. So, after especially Precious playing well down the stretch of that game, getting subbed out, again, I find it interesting. It's something we briefly discussed in the video following after that, but I don't know. It makes sense to bring Scotty back in, but especially a guy like Precious, who was really cooking that night, can space the floor when his jump shot's rolling and all that type of stuff. These guys are all professionally trained athletes. I don't like this sort of cop-out answer, the workload and stuff. I don't think there was a world where Precious, Boucher, or Malachi Flynn would have wanted to be taken out of that game or felt the need to get subbed out. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. Interesting comments there for Darko Rajakovic. He's been catching a little bit of fire lately, which I think some of it's warranted, some of it isn't. But, it's going to be interesting to see how the fan base sort of feels about Darko as the season goes along. But the last thing we're taking a look at is a former Raptor role player, didn't get a lot of minutes for the Toronto Raptors. Yuta Watanabe reveals the truth about leaving the Toronto Raptors. And, this is a big headline that's been going around over the past couple days because Yuta Watanabe ended up going on the Raptors show and discussed, his time in Toronto. The obviously Shohei Ohtani stuff has my heart absolutely broken. I'm not the craziest of baseball fans, but just following everything on Jay's Digest definitely had me in an emotional roller coaster. But Yuta Watanabe, he's with the Toronto Raptors. He was outspoken about his love for the city, love for Toronto, and also just came out and said, "Hey, I wanted to stay with the Toronto Raptors," and apparently he was devastated to leave the Raptors. Obviously went to the Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant, is now down, follow KD to the Phoenix Suns, and has carved out a really nice role in the NBA. He's been a really solid shooter. We all know how well Yuta used to play defense. Obviously, his finishing at the rim has been lackluster at times. He goes in, even though he's athletic, even though he can cram it down, his just body control, I guess, similar to in the vein of Terrence Ross, right? A guy that's very athletic, can drive to the lane. We've seen some nasty dunks for Yuta Watanabe, but when they go to the rim, they just never finish strong enough of the paint to finish over a defender, take contact, and finish around the bucket. And that was a big thing that I think held Yuta Watanabe back, along with inconsistent three-point shooting when he's with the Toronto Raptors. But again, had inconsistent run, had inconsistent sort of minutes for the team, so it's on sort of the Nick Nurse's system for not giving him long enough leash to sort of work out that shooting slump, because he's been a remarkable shooter since he's left the Toronto Raptors, and also on Yuta for not making his shots down the clutch or down the opportunities he had them, and then not being able to finish at the rim that well. But let me know what you guys think about all this Toronto Raptors news. You guys best make this far. Subscribe to the channel if you guys haven't already. I'm signing out. Cheers.